On the two sides of the ancient mottled bronze table, blurry figures extended outward from the embrace of deep red beams of light before turning corporeal. The surroundings remained as silent and empty as always, as though no living creature had ever set foot there for millions of years. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool Tilda." Audrey's brisk and cheerful voice soon resounded through the resplendent palace held up by stone columns. Klein nodded his head with a smile, watching as the other members expressed their greetings under Miss Justice's lead. Here there was no doubt that the hermit Catlia appeared rather reticent. Audrey's read on her was that she had many things on her mind. After the voices came to a stop and the members had taken their seats, the fool Klein swept Miss Justice a glance, making the psychiatrist instantly understand his intentions. Hence, she didn't raise her hand slightly and speak out. Following that, he looked at Catalia and chuckled indifferently. "Tell Bernadette that she can use certain items in exchange for some answer." Bernadette, after hearing this familiar name which was neither Queen Mystic, the owner of Dawn, nor the leader of the element Dawn, Catlia realized that Mr. Fool already knew everything. Her cheap tricks were laid bare in front of him. This made her heart sink as she couldn't help but feel an intense sense of fear. She was temporarily at a loss in regard to the attitude or words that she needed to show in response. To her, Mr. Fool's words were clear. Pass on the message, but only that one message, nothing else. She wasn't allowed to provide any other hints. Catlia believed she knew what he meant between the lines. Bernadette. That's a common name for Inti's female. Who could it be? What is the answer she wishes to exchange for? What relationship does she have with Ma'am Hermit? Ma'am Hermit had privately made a request, and Mr. Fool's answer is yes. No, that's not it. Definitely not it. If it's a private and reasonable request, Ma'am Hermit wouldn't have mentioned it specially in front of us. He would have directly replied to her prayers. He is giving a warning. Audrey forgot to observe the other members as a series of questions flashed through her mind. Following that, with her acumen from the spectator pathway, she grasped Mr. Fool's true intention. Following that, she had a particular theory. Ma'am Hermit had privately hinted about our tarot club to this Ma'am Bernadette because she hopes to acquire some answers. Mr. Fool is very displeased regarding this matter, so he pointed it out directly and gave this first-time offender a warning. Seriously, why would you divulge matters of the gathering to others? I haven't even told Susie. This will bring danger to everyone. Thankfully, Mr. Fool is around. Audrey nearly puffed up her cheeks, forgetting her image and etiquette. For the first time, she realized that not every tarot club member had a sense of belonging like she did, showing such reverence and faith in Mr. Fool. Hanged Man Alger, the Magician Fours, and the Moon Emlyn also had similar questions and theories, but their focus wasn't the same. As Alger anticipated what Mr. Fool would do, he began to wonder who this Bernadette, a commonly seen female Inti's name, represented. He was curious as to why the reserved hermit would risk divulging some information on the tarot club. While Fours was worried if the existence of the tarot club would be exposed, she also instantly imagined a spy and double spy story. Emlyn watched in schadenfreude, believing the hermit to be truly foolish. Even our sanguine's ancestor treats Mr. Fool equally, and had sent me as an envoy to be nurtured. You aren't even a demigod, but you attempted to try pulling off cheap tricks under Mr. Fool's watch. Do you have a death wish? Indeed, I can't understand the thoughts of short-lived creatures. Emperor Roselle once said that bugs that can only live in summer have no way of truly knowing what snow looks like. Emlyn sat back in a relaxed manner as he didn't hide the shaking of his head. The son Derek didn't have many thoughts on the matter. All he felt was that the mood wasn't right. Out of curiosity and puzzlement, he asked, "Mr. Fool, who's Bernadette?" Well asked. I thought Miss Justice would be the one asking. Yes, she seems a little angry, which is why she doesn't wish to speak. Klein silently commended him as he casually answered, Roselle's eldest daughter, owner of the Dawn, the leader of the element Dawn. He mentioned all of Bernadette's identities, making her appear without any secrets before all the tarot club members. And the reason why he had used owner of the Dawn in place of Queen Mystic was that Klein didn't believe that the fool should address Bernadette as a queen. The owner of the Dawn, Queen Mystic. She's actually Emperor Roselle's eldest daughter. The hermit, I can confirm that you are Admiral of Stars Catlia. So the rumors of you having a falling out with Queen Mystic are fake. Alger felt excited. He felt that the restriction and pressure he had endured for the past 3 months had vanished at once. This made his staid self mock the hermit inwardly. Emperor Roselle once said that those who play with fire will ultimately burn themselves. And you, Admiral of Stars, dare to challenge a god's clairvoyance. At that moment, Alger was rather thankful that although he had attempted to pull off some cheap tricks and attempted to figure out Mr. Fool's identity, goals, and present state, he hadn't involved any outsiders. He hadn't divulged any information, so he hadn't suffered any punishment. As he had introduced the 4 kings and the 7 pirate admirals, Audrey and company just needed to recall in order to confirm that Bernadette was Queen Mystic, a demigod that reigned supreme over the 5 seas. They were also surprised that Emperor Roselle's eldest daughter would still be alive and had become an important figure that was known throughout the world. The answers that Queen Mystic wishes to obtain are hidden inside Roselle's diary. Combining everything that had happened and the words that were said, Audrey vaguely guessed Bernadette's goal, believing that the Emperor's daughter wished to figure out the truth behind her father's assassination. At this moment, Katlia had already regained her ability to think. She turned her body to face the end of the long bronze table and said without any hopes that she could be let off, "Yes, I committed some mistakes. I will not defend myself. It was indeed wrong. Mr. Fool, no matter how much you punish me or even kill me, I'll accept it." Hypocrite, if Mr. Fool really wishes to punish you, do you think you have any means of resistance? Mr. Hanged Man scoffed on the opposite side of the table. He could identify the problem with such a simple sentence. Ma'am Hermit is still a little afraid. Audrey could notice the hidden fear from the minute actions and words Katlia had used. To her, people who deliberately emphasized their willingness to be executed were often afraid of dying right there and then. Force found her peace from the fool's calm attitude, believing that there weren't any leaks about the Tarot Club, or that the leaks weren't anything important. Hence, like Emlyn, she waited curiously and expectantly for the punishment Mr. Fool would mete out. Derek remained clueless about what had happened, uncertain why Ma'am Hermit would suddenly request to be punished. At that moment, seeing Mr. Fool's brief moment of silence, Katlia resisted her unease and lifted her head slightly, observing the existence behind the thick gray fog without a trace, in an attempt to figure out his true intention so as to give a better response. She didn't wish to make another mistake again and provoke him, making the situation irredeemable. The dark purple hue in her black eyes produced a sense of mystery as her eyes penetrated through the gray fog and saw the fool. Suddenly, Katlia's eyes heated up as illusory blood bled from them. A sinister, terrifying, and depraved language and an indescribable roar sounded in her ear. It instantly filled her senses with extreme pain as her body began to convulse and tremble uncontrollably. Her face, hands, and the areas that weren't concealed by her clothing had quickly cracked open, revealing her flesh and blood. Inside, black worms and white moths squirmed before forming all kinds of indescribable eyes. Katlia's cries and painful grunts resounded above the gray fog, causing Alger, Emlyn, Fours, and company to exchange looks as though they could sense the pain she was suffering. Meanwhile, the blurry figure turned rather clear, allowing them to see the hermit's mutation. The disgusting and nasty scene frightened Audrey enough for her to look away. She straightened her back and looked straight ahead without daring to move. Although the others didn't have such an exaggerated response, they also shared the same behavior. The true creator's ravings are indeed useful. Klein, who was shrouded in the thick gray fog, reflected from the bottom of his heart. The reason why he hadn't immediately replied to Katlia's request for punishment was because he wanted to confirm if there was anything special about her eyes, whether they could see beyond what he allowed. For this, he had stirred some of the mysterious space's powers to be hidden in the gray fog that shrouded him ahead of time. It was to connect anyone who used a Beyonder power to see through the obstacle to Tinder. This was equivalent to the owner of the Beyonder power, directly observing an item corrupted by the true creator at a psyche level. Hence, with Klein not using the gray fog to deliberately suppress the influence, Katlia naturally heard the true creator's raving. Her organ, which used the Beyonder power, was first severely damaged before she was imbued with extreme pain, causing her mutation. If Admiral of Stars hadn't tried observing him, then the plan Klein had prepared was to get her to apologize to every Tarot Club member, and also to allow them to discuss a method of punishment in a democratic manner. And regardless of how democratic it was, the major punishment would ultimately be to stir some of the mysterious space's powers to connect Katlia to Tinder. After waiting 2 seconds, Klein knew it was enough. He gently lowered his palms, allowing the gray fog to silently repress the true creator's ravings and revert Catlia's mutation. Admiral of Stars trembled as she calmed down at a discernible pace. The cracks in her skin gradually closed as her thoughts returned to her, allowing her to take in her surroundings once again. At this moment, Alger said in a deep voice, as though he was warning himself, "Do not pry into the mystery of God. Do not pry into the mystery of God." Alger's whisper soon disappeared, but it continued resounding in everyone's ears, making them realize a reality. Although Mr. Fool often didn't put on any airs and seldom spoke, nearly answering every request they had, making them find him warm, he was ultimately a god whose mysteries shouldn't be pried into. He was a god that transcended reality. Audrey M. Lynn and the other Tarot Club members instinctively accepted Mr. Hanged Man's altered saying, pretending that they had forgotten the original wording to be, "Do not look directly at God," because they had looked at Mr. Fool from time to time, asking him questions or seeking his advice, and with regards to that, Mr. Fool didn't seem to mind. Of course, we weren't looking at him directly due to the thick gray fog's obstruction. From Ma'am Hermit's outcome, Mr. Fool had done so for our own good. Audrey slowly exhaled. At this moment, the Fool Klein was thinking, "Mr. Hanged Man is working very well in concert." I was prepared to control the world to say something similar to complete the final step of the punishment. He originally felt that getting the fake world to say something like, "Do not lie to God," or "Do not pry into the mystery of God," would make it somewhat embarrassing. In the future, if people were to learn that the so-called blessed or the so-called world was actually a smurf of the Fool, he would be too embarrassed to face anyone. But later, on second thought, the world had done similar deeds in the past, so he wasn't short of one more. Besides, all he needed to do was to not let anyone know, right? Having overcome his mental barrier, Klein had planned on acting according to his rehearsals, but to his surprise, reality went better than he had expected. The Hanged Man seemed to be shocked to the bone as a result of the hermit's punishment. As such, he helped him say the sentence, "Do not pry into the mystery of God," making the effects even more natural and perfect. Yes, the problem of Ma'am Hermit's leak of information regarding the Tarot Club was only briefly tapped on by the Fool. He had given a warning via the insinuation behind his words, but she later suffered from prying into the mystery of a god. It wasn't truly the Fool's intentions. This is the outcome I wished for the most. This can effectively uphold the Fool's image. After all, a god wouldn't be petty with mortals, as it would only tarnish his reputation. However, the way Ma'am Hermit does things is way too bold. I just realized and confirmed today that she has pried into the mysteries of the Fool more than once. Although it wasn't for any vile motives, it's also something worth punishing her for. My previous reactions must have made her believe that I had acquiesced her observations, so she made it a habit. In the end, she ended up falling headfirst into my expectations. In addition, without fully grasping Mr. Fool's attitude, she directly gave hints to outsiders. Her boldness is obviously extraordinary. This means to show that she hasn't suffered enough in the past. Today's lesson should be enough to drill it into her for a very long period of time. Thinking back to her state in her dream, all of this seems pretty much the expected outcome. Sparing the rod spoils the child. I also managed to put Mr. Hanged Man as well as the other members in check today as a result. Klein silently muttered to himself in amusement, surveyed the area and said calmly, "That shall be all." Upon hearing that, the hermit Catlia, whose spirit body had just recovered, felt relieved. She felt intense fatigue, and joy surged through her body. All she wanted was a reclining chair for her to rest for a while. The first time is a warning, but the second time wouldn't be a nice outcome. This pirate admiral sighed silently, warning herself not to try her cheap tricks any further or believe that her hints could fool Mr. Fool. She was also not to attempt to pry into his secret. The pain she received was in no way weaker than the torment of having knowledge injected into her by the hidden sage. Therefore, she believed without a doubt that Mr. Fool was essentially a god, a true god, an unfathomable god whose mysteries couldn't be pried into. Thankfully, Her Majesty now knows where she can exchange the answers she has been desperately looking for all this while. I don't need to hint to her or tip her off in the future. Catlia turned her body to the side again, trembling as she looked at the end of the long bronze table. This time, she only dared to look at the end of the table or the armrest. The dark purple hue in her eyes had also turned faint. Amid silence, with sincerity, she said, "I'll remember your leniency in sparing me." In the gray fog, The fool Klein nodded gently without repeating his previous words. After a moment of waiting, the magician force straightened her back, looked around, and spoke before Justice Audrey. Everyone, is anyone interested in an assassination mission? The target is an important member of a cult. Grateful for the favors her teacher, Dorian Gray, had given her, Forrest had been recently hoping to do something for him. After some consideration, she placed her sights on the Aurora Order Oracle, who had dealt immense damage to her teacher's family, Louis Ween, who could be a scribe or traveler. She didn't let Lemano's travels get to her head, to the point of believing that she could kill an experienced Sequence 6 or Sequence 5 Beyonder who was good at escaping. The reason why she had such considerations was that she believed that the secret organization known as the Tarot Club, which was backing her, would provide her with unimaginable support. Ma'am Hermit and Mr. World both appear to have the means to fight Louis Ween. With any of them taking action, and with me using Lemano's travels to help, it's not impossible for us to succeed. Forrest began formulating the most ideal situation. Of course, she knew that her current savings weren't enough to kill a powerful Beyonder like Louis Ween. After all, with her 830 pounds, she probably couldn't even buy a single hand of his. She knew very well that back then, Miss Audrey Hall had spent more than 10,000 pounds to kill an Inti's ambassador, a Sequence 6 conspirer. The cost of assassinating Louis Ween, who was of a similar sequence or even higher, was obvious. Forrest planned on agreeing to a series of requests that the executor of the mission would have, helping the executor complete matters they found inconvenient to do themselves, in order to pay off the cost of the mission. She believed that after obtaining Lemano's travels, she was equipped with the abilities to complete certain difficult tasks. After hearing Miss Magician's request, the hermit Catlia, the hanged man Alger, and Justice Audrey cast their gazes onto the world. They believed that this gentleman, one who had a unique penchant for hunting Beyonders, possessed the necessary strength. I'm not in Backland, however, I can't respond that way. Otherwise, it would expose the possibility that Mr. Fool only has 2 to 3 blessed to Mr. Hanged Man and Ma'am Hermit. Klein controlled the world, overcoming his emotions as he hoarsely laughed. Where? Which cult? What's his sequence? What unique powers does he have? Mr. World is a little different from before. I can't explain it clearly, but it feels like he's suddenly in a better mood. Perhaps he has really encountered something worth being happy about. Audrey suddenly noticed the difference as she excitedly imagined what could have recently happened to Mr. World. Fuzz happily replied, he's an oracle from the Aurora Order. He's in Backland, formerly a Sequence 6, but he might be a Sequence 5 now, but I can't be sure. He can record the Beyonder powers that others have used, and can use them once. He's good at escaping any form of entrapment, and it's difficult to surround him. Perhaps he might be able to travel through the spirit world. The target is an oracle from the Aurora Order, a Sequence 6 or 5, with powers seemingly from the apprentice pathway. Indeed, Miss Magician doesn't appear as simple and ordinary as she seemed. My original judgment was right. Catlia quickly returned to her usual state. She wasn't surprised that the magician would actually dare conspire against a particular gentleman from the Aurora Order. As for which oracle he was, she wasn't sure because the only ones she knew were Mr. Z and Ma'am D. Meanwhile, Klein also quickly evaluated the situation. An oracle from the Aurora Order, that makes it impossible for him to be innocent. Rather, he's a madman who destroys lives. Killing him doesn't make me feel guilty. It's not like I haven't offended the Aurora Order more than once or twice. Sequence 6 or 5. That's something I can handle. I've seen something that matches the trait of recording and releasing Beyonder powers as described by Miss Magician. Mr. A had used it before, but it might not really be it. To me, it doesn't matter if he's good at escaping and traveling through the spirit world. As long as I'm close to the oracle and successfully control his spirit body threads, there will be no way for him to run. It's hard to tell what will happen in a direct clash. I do have quite a solid chance of success if I sneak an attack in. Of course, succeeding at a sneak attack is a whole other matter. After some serious consideration, the world looked at the magician for. He can consider taking on the job, but not anytime soon. It will at the least be 2 months later. He wasn't sure what other accidents he would encounter at sea, so he had been rather relaxed on the time period. 2 months later, Forrest repeated the time, appearing to be in a deep dilemma. It was too long besides. She wasn't sure how long Louis Ween would stay in Backland. At this moment, Alger, who had been watching from the side, deliberated and interjected. Miss Magician, Do you need to kill that Aurora Order Oracle personally? No, as you can see, I'm considering requesting Mr. World for help, Forz replied with a smile. Alger nodded as though in thought. The premise of killing someone is to be able to find the Oracle. Can you find him? No, but PLL investigate, Forz answered frankly. Why don't you get the world to do it after your investigations bear fruit? The hanged man pressed. Yes, but I haven't decided. Forz was somewhat confused, unaware of the reasons as to why Mr. Hanged man was asking her all these questions. Alger sneered. TF, you can confirm the location of the Aurora Order Oracle's location. Then why spend large amounts of money to hire someone to kill him? Wouldn't reporting him directly to the churches be enough? After the Great Smog, no church is willing to let go of any related clues. He wasn't trying to make the world lose any business. Instead, he had clearly read the dilemma inside her, believing that there was a higher possibility of her not going through with the request. After all, too many incidents might happen in 2 months. Therefore, he gave some suggestions to ensure that this matter reached some preliminary agreement. Report him to the churches. This sounds familiar, Klein was surprised, never expecting Mr. Hanged Man to say something like that. Heh, while everyone is being infected by Mr. Hanged Man, he too has been influenced by us. Klein immediately felt relieved and rather pleased. Report. Forz was momentarily stunned. After a few seconds, she whispered, That's possible. The Hanged Man smiled upon hearing that. You can do it this way. First, investigate your target and seek out his whereabouts. If you obtain anything in 2 months, then you can hand the matter over to the church. If the matter exceeds 2 months, and when Mr. World is free, then he can provide you the help needed. What do you think of that? Forz seriously considered it and said, Okay. When the time comes, I'll discuss the price with Mr. World. After receiving the world's consenting nod and confirming the matter regarding Louis Ween, Forz thought for a moment and continued. Everyone, does anyone have a meteorite crystal or the crystallized blood of a lavo squid, or any information about them? These were the main ingredients of the astrologer potion formula. Forz originally planned on continuing her requests, hoping that Mr. Moon, who was also in Backland, could help her find Louis Ween, but after some consideration, she decided to first do it herself. Only after confirming that there aren't any solutions or clues would she then request the Tarot Club for help. Meteorite crystal. Lavo squid's crystallized blood. Sounds familiar. Isn't this because I know the seer potion formula? Yes, it's familiar because the seer potion formula's main ingredients is 50 grams of star crystal and 10 ml of lavo squid blood. The main ingredients of astrologer are like the upgraded versions of a seer. Indeed, the apprentice and seer pathway can be interchanged in the future. With this in mind, Klein suddenly had an idea. Since the potion formula of Bizarro Sorcerer is difficult to obtain, with the 3 options being extremely dangerous, should I consider the other sequence 4 options in the neighboring pathway? Such as apprentice. Once he had this idea, he brightened up as he felt that most of his predicament had vanished. And for the sequence 4 potion formula of apprentice, the Tarot Club has clues to it. It's the Abraham family behind the magician. With this in mind, the world looked at Miss Magician with a subconscious gentleness to his gaze. It left Forz shuddering, suspecting whether Mr. World had already formulated a plan to hunt Louis Ween. At this moment, the fool Klein recalled another problem. According to Dunn's and Dolly's theories, the first 5 sequences of the seer pathway didn't present any obvious progression. Each of them presented a beyonder power of one aspect. Then, at the critical point of sequence 4, the 5 of them would converge and clench like a fist, presenting a qualitative change. Back when Captain and Ma'am Dolly made this theory, they only knew bits of information regarding seer, clown, and magician. I'm only able to verify this idea for the subsequent faceless and marionetist by myself. So, could it be that seer, apprentice, and the possible marauder pathways cannot be interchanged at sequence 4, but at sequence 3? Klein slowly felt his joy dwindle again. He knew too little and was temporarily unable to make a judgment. All he could do was await Mr. Azek's reply, and wait to leave the waters which were watched by the true creator before contacting Arrows. As Klein was thinking, he suddenly heard Catlia say, I have the crystallized blood of a lavo squid. It will cost 600 pounds. As for meteorite crystal, I know where to get it from. How many grams do you need? £600, a very reasonable price, Forbes replied in a pleasant surprise. 60 gram. All right, PLL give them to you within 2 weeks. It will also cost £600, Katlia said clearly and succinctly. It's resolved just like that. Today's Ma'am Hermit is really proactive with the desire to participate. Yes, she had just been, Forbes quickly nodded. That wouldn't be an issue. I have £830 in saving. That's enough for me to buy the crystallized blood of a lavo squid. But in 2 weeks, I still need to save up nearly £400. The royalties after the new year will be paid soon. It's about £150, making me lack £220. I have to think of ways to earn money again. Forbes quickly calculated her financial situation. Seeing how Miss Magician took only a minute to gather the main ingredients for her potion, Justice Audrey couldn't hold back either. She raised her hand slightly and said, I wish to obtain the complete pituitary gland of an adolescent mind dragon, but if that's not possible, 60 ml of a black hunting giant lizard's spinal fluid and 1 fruit of an illusory chime tree. This was the main ingredient of the hypnotist potion. If she obtained the complete pituitary gland of the adolescent mind dragon, then there was no need for any other corresponding ingredients. Just as Audrey said that, she heard Ma'am Hermit reply. Since the 5th epoch, mind dragons have nearly gone extinct and are hard to find. You have the means of obtaining the spinal fluid of a black hunting giant lizard, but it will also take 2 to 3 weeks. The price ranges from £1,500 to £2,000, as I'm not the one who decides it. He can help you keep a lookout for the fruit of an illusory chime tree, but I cannot guarantee anything. What great efficiency. After Ma'am Hermit was punished, her sense of belonging towards the Tarot Club has appeared to increase. She's more active and amiable. Audrey was momentarily speechless. After a few seconds of silence, she bowed slightly and said, No problem. Alger, who had been watching by the side, suddenly felt that the development wasn't going as he expected. Having been punished by Mr. Fool, the hermit changed her style of being mostly an observer. She began to involve herself in every matter that she could involve herself in during the tarot gathering. And with the strength, background, resources, and channels of a pirate admiral, she immediately produced intense and blinding light. This blinded Alger so much that he could hardly open his eye. He had a strong feeling that he was at risk. At that moment, he wished for Ma'am Hermit to return to her former state. Klein also felt surprised by what he heard and saw. I thought Ma'am Hermit would be silent for some time, feeling an aversion to the Tarot Club for some time, but in the end, is she the type that needs to be beaten in order to be obedient? Yes, sparing the rod spoils the child. Queen Mystic must have spared the rod too much, The way Queen Mystic does things isn't much to speak of either. The Emperor has also spared the rod. As he lampooned, Klein controlled the world, making him survey the area before chuckling. Does any one of you have the potion formula of the Seer Pathway Sequence 4, or have any clues regarding it? Sequence 4, Mr. World is beginning to advance towards the realm of a demigod. Audrey was surprised. She originally imagined that she was advancing sufficiently fast, and she felt a little proud about that. But now she suddenly realized that she was falling behind. Mr. World has instantly become really lofty. Forbes was similarly surprised. Although she felt that the silent, reserved, and unsocial Mr. World was a powerful beyonder, she believed that he was still very far from a demigod, from a Sequence 4. But to her surprise, he was already seeking to purchase the Sequence 4 potion formula. As expected of Mr. Fool's blessed, Alger sighed. Likewise, Emlyn and Derek shook their heads, expressing that they had never heard of the name of the Pathway Sequence 4. Klein, who believed that he could obtain clues from the City of Silver or the Sanguine, could only helplessly retract the world's gaze. After a few seconds, Katlia said, I need a drop of blood from a mythical creature, regardless of the kind. In the palace held up by stone columns, silence suddenly became the main symphony. Even the world didn't know the exact concept of what a mythical creature was. Klein didn't expose this point, as he planned on inquiring about it to the people he could ask in the future. He controlled the world to remain silent for a few seconds before saying, I'll keep an eye out. As this was a rare request from Ma'am Hermit, Justice and company also gave similar responses. All right. Katlia wasn't surprised by this outcome. The only reason why she made the request was to express her attitude of being integrated with the Tarot Club to Mr. Fool. She believed that this was better than trembling and being apprehensive at eliminating the aftereffects of what had happened. After a brief pause, Derek was about to say something when Imlin spoke out ahead of him. The sanguine Baron chuckled. The request for our row is clear. He wants the Sun Sequence 6 Notary's Potion Formula, and Mr. Hanged Man wishes to obtain the Ocean Songster. Upon hearing this, Klein suddenly felt a little guilt-ridden. When he first obtained Creeping Hunger, he had wished to quickly release the Priest of Light in it, and obtaining the Sequence 6 and 5 potion formulas of the Sun Pathway, so as to sell it to Little Sun. Yet he hadn't completed it all this while. I'll walk around Toskotter's pier tonight. I'll find a pirate with Beyonder powers who deserves to die or some gang leader to settle this emergency, regardless of which sequence they are. Or, I can directly release the Priest of Light. Klein made the world deliberate before saying, I'll provide you with the notary potion formula in 3 days. Upon saying this, he looked at Little Sun. You can consider what item you wish to exchange for it. All right, Mr. World, Derek replied in glee. As for the Ocean Songster potion formula which the Hanged Man needed, everyone didn't have any clue. Emlyn cleared his throat and said, My request is different from the last one. I hope that you can help me find the believers of the primordial moon. Every effective clue will be rewarded with £100. A direct confirmation will be £500. He looked at Mr. Fool to make a request, and after obtaining his approval, he conjured 5 things that resembled bounty notices. Each person received a set of the 5 bounties. He and Derek didn't have one. Klein controlled the world to pick it up and casually browse through it. Golly's Kevin, Dandy, Lara, Windsor bearing Argus, they aren't weak at all. At the very least, they're equivalent to recently born vampires, he silently muttered to himself as he memorized the corresponding information. After completing this matter, Emlyn felt more confident about winning the competition. He leaned back casually and waited for the other members to issue requests. This time no one spoke again. Upon seeing this, the fool Klein chuckled. Continue a free exchange. Instantly, Audrey, Alger, Catlia, and company cast their eyes at Derek. They remembered that the Sun had previously mentioned that he would have arrangements to join an exploration mission that involved the periphery of the Giant King's court. Being the main focus of attention, Derek didn't choke. He eagerly said, I've recently been in an exploration team led by the chief to Afternoon Town. It's a key gateway that leads to the Giant King's court. It's a door that separates myth from reality. His opening perfectly garnered the interest of all the Tarot Club members as they awaited the rest of his account in different posture. Derek skipped the unimportant experiences that they had during the journey, and he directly started his story from Afternoon Town. He first described the dead silence and darkness, before how his 3-member team discovered an underground altar. He then described how he identified the names, Ouroboros, Medici, and Sasrier, and entered another side of the town without realizing. There he saw the titles such as Dark Angel and the words Rose Redemption. Having said that, he thanked Mr. Fool once again for his help from the predicament. Then Derek simply introduced the monsters that transformed from their shadows, before emphasizing the ecclesiastic, who was in constant penitence in the half-collapsed cathedral. He used his own words to describe what was said, mentioning that the ecclesiastic suddenly self-destructed when he was about to say the name of the 4th king of angels and was burnt to a crisp by a transparent flame. Another king of angels. And the mood in Afternoon Town is really dark and scary. The ecclesiastic's penitence has a very a feel of a prophet predicting a calamity. Audrey listened in relish as she had her interest about the blank line and unspeakable name piqued. At this moment, Derek turned his body and looked at the end of the bronze table, sincerely asking, Mr. Fool, who was it that tempted Dark Angel Sasrier? Who does the 4th name refer to? Why can't it be said? Here it comes behind the gray fog. Klein's smile nearly froze. The reason that he had hurriedly sent Little Sun back to the real world was that he was afraid of facing such a question. Back then, he was worried that Little Sun would inquire about Dark Angel Sasrier, and now he was facing a question he didn't know the answer to. Thankfully, a magician never performed unprepared. After that day, Klein undoubtedly began to seriously consider how to answer such questions. Now, with great confidence, he landed his right palm on the armrest and said with a deep, meaningful glint in his eye, It's because of the secret. He used his eyes and body language to hint to the Tarot Club members that secret wasn't to be taken at face level, and it had a deeper, more substantial meaning. As for what it was, they had to figure it out themselves. Deities had deep reasons to conceal certain matter. After finishing this series of actions, Klein couldn't help but feel penitent. He felt that his charlatan vibes were increasing. Meanwhile, he felt regret that the hermit's prying into his secrets was a result of his temptation. This was because Mr. Fool would use his eyes and body language to provide additional hints. Therefore, all the members would subconsciously observe his attitude. That's because I have no solutions. Without doing this, how am I supposed to continue the act? It's not like I'm a real evil god. Klein sighed silently. Secret. The name itself is a secret. The content which Mr. Fool wishes to point out is in here, and which names are secret themselves, true gods at sequence 0. Alger instantly thought of many things as he came up with a theory, by combining many of the matters which Little Sun had previously mentioned. When a name itself becomes a secret, it means that the matter involves a true god. Furthermore, it's very likely to have the Evernight goddess involved. It's because she's the mother of secret. The extreme danger of the darkness in the forsaken land of the gods indirectly proves this point. Katlia came up with an unconfirmed theory based on the knowledge she had, and the hint from Mr. Fool. Meanwhile, she was almost certain that the calamity the ecclesiastic was referring to was the cataclysm that ended the third epoch. The king of angels who was tempted, afternoon town residents who fell from grace, a town being corrupted bit by bit, a black flower of calamity that blooms. All of that buried in epoch, creating the forsaken land of the gods. What a heavy sense of history. Katlia couldn't help but think poignantly. While the Tarot Club members were in contemplation, Klein also began to analyze the reason for the empty name, and the reason why it couldn't be said. Could it be the true name of a deity? A true god had tempted Dark Angel Sasrir, and the fourth name representing the King of Angels also became a true god later. But it's not like I haven't said the true name of a deity before. Primordial Demoness Cheek is understood by many to be on the same level as the 7 deities. It's not like anything happened in the end. Perhaps it has something to do with the language used. The languages of Lone, Intis, and Fasak, and even ancient Fasak, do not possess the ability to stir the powers of nature. On the other hand, the commonly used Jotun in the city of Silver can. That ecclesiastic likely used a similar language. I should later try to pronounce Cheek using Jotun. Then I'll die on the spot and succeed in courting death. Forget it. Besides, having a blank name and an unspeakable name means different things. I've no idea why. At this moment, seeing how Little Sun was still in a confused daze without understanding Mr. Fool's meaningful hint, Alger volunteered to give an explanation. The 2 names might separately represent 2 deities, so they cannot be said. Perhaps the true creator had tempted Dark Angel Sasrir, leading to the fall from grace of the few kings of angels and the residents of Afternoon Town. This brought about a great calamity. It's why he has a temple and statue in your forsaken land of the god. The fourth name that corresponds to a king of angels might have benefited greatly from the calamity and succeeded in advancing to become a true god. This is similar to my guess, but they can't be confirmed. Katlia didn't supplement, as she didn't believe that their theories were facts. Audrey, Fours, and Emlyn listened attentively, as they couldn't help but feel poignant that the Tarot Club often made things appear especially high-end when discussing such matters. Things like kings of angels, evil gods and real gods, or ancient secrets all depended on a single word. T.S. That's so I get it. Derek came to a realization as he earnestly thanked Mr. Fool once again. Just as he was about to turn around, he suddenly recalled something and worriedly asked, Mr. Fool, is the crux to leaving the forsaken land of the gods really in the giant king's court? After all this time, he had already accepted Mr. Hanged Man's take that the region where the city of Silver was located was known as the forsaken land of the god. That's what I believe, but the problem is that I'm unable to confirm it. To not search for the sea and switch to exploring the giant king's court was likely Shepherd Lovia's suggestion. This can partially verify my theory, but it cannot eliminate the possibility that it's a conspiracy. The Fool Klein's smile nearly froze again. His thoughts raced as he quickly thought of a solution that didn't need him to give a direct answer without tarnishing Mr. Fool's reputation. He immediately gave a relaxed chuckle, turned his head at the hermit Katlia. Speaking of this matter, Bernadette already knows the method for entering the forsaken land of the gods. Katlia immediately recalled her vague memories of the dream and subconsciously looked at the end of the bronze table. It's that shadow. Before she finished speaking, she suddenly realized that she was sizing up Mr. Fool again. She hurriedly closed her eyes and said, My eye of mystery prying is instinctive. It can only be enhanced and not be deactivated. I need to rely on a mystical item to seal it, but it doesn't exist here. Is that so? Klein nodded gently. You can conjure a pair of glasses. Yes, Mr. Fool. Catlia followed the instructions and conjured a pair of glasses. During this process, Klein stirred a minute amount of the power above the gray fog and infused them into the pair of glasses. By the time Catlia wore them, she discovered that her eye of mystery prying had been sealed as she had expected. It was only at this point that Fours and company realized that Ma'am Hermit's eyes were extremely special. It had something to do with the prying of mysteries, and it didn't need to be activated to use it. It's no wonder we didn't notice it. Ma'am Hermit was severely injured because of her attempt to pry into the mysteries of Mr. Fool. Audrey moved her lips in enlightenment, having one of her questions answered. As for Alger, who recalled how the hermit had previously sized him up and how he had been wearing the clergy clothes of the Church of Storms, his face nearly darkened. Klein didn't wait for the members to calm down. He chuckled and replied to Catlia's previous question. "TD's that shadow. The shadow of the Giant King's court." "So it's the shadow of the Giant King's court," Catlia muttered in pleasant surprise. Then her mind went adrift as she thought. She likely also knows this answer. Derek spent a few seconds to digest the conversation between Ma'am Hermit and Mr. Fool, and he vaguely came to a realization. Key to entering the forsaken land of the gods had to do with the shadow of the Giant King's court. Therefore, the crux to leaving the forsaken land of the gods is really in the Giant King's court. Derek's heart palpitated as he bowed his head in excitement. "Thank you for your answer, Mr. Fool." Klein silently heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that such a situation was extremely draining on his brain. Alger kept his emotions in check as he looked around before looking at the hermit. "Where's the shadow of the Giant King's court?" He didn't dare ask Mr. Fool, as his question about the forsaken land of the gods had previously been rejected. Catlia answered frankly, "In the waters on the easternmost front of the Sanya Sea. In the dream of the night time there. He happened to wish to share with all of you what I encountered this time." Audrey and Fours simultaneously slowed their breathing as they waited excitedly for Ma'am Hermit to recount her encounters, which were bound to be fantastic. Catlia controlled herself without looking at the world Jamin. She said in a deep and slow voice, "Northeast from the Gargas archipelago, there's a safe sea route that allows one to enter those dangerous waters." She began her description with the deep abyss which separated the seas, the sun chariot which couldn't be viewed directly, the night which required sleeping, the terrifying ravings that filled the entire sea, and the shadow of the Giant King's court which stood on the opposite mountain peak in the dream world. During this process, she didn't mention Jam and Sparrow at all, deliberately avoiding any mention of him. As for the abnormalities that happened en route, she described them simply, such as the remnant aura of Mother Earth which caused hair to grow rapidly. Towards the end, she placed her focus on the ruin with a sleeping corpse and the adventurer's sailboat which had the words written in blood, "Fountain of Unaging." This might mean that the Fountain of Unaging is in that ruin, and the corpse that produced such loud breathing is the keeper. Catlia mentioned the common theories on the future, but it didn't mean that it was hers. Fountain of Unaging, one of the 6 major treasures at sea, Alger was tempted by what he heard as he considered the possibility of exploring those ruins after reaching Sequence 5. Audrey finished listening attentively as she shook her head slightly. Don't believe that the decisive meaning behind those words in blood mean that the Fountain of Unaging is in those ruins. After a second's pause, she attempted to analyze the deceased's state of mind. A person who's about to die after being attacked by monsters wouldn't point out matters regarding the treasure. If he wishes to warn companions or relatives who come looking for him, then he should have written that it's dangerous here, or speak about the source of the danger. If he plans to tell passing ships that the Fountain of Unaging is there, then he lacks the motivation to do so for a living creature at death's doorstep. Unless a conspiracy is hidden in this matter, the conspiracy of enticing people to enter the ruin to seek out the Fountain of Unaging might be how he can be rescued. Yes, if I were in his shoes, I wouldn't think of desperately telling others that there's treasure here. What's in it for me? Emlyn echoed. Only hatred, bone-deep hatred, will make me write something like that on the brink of death. Otherwise, I'd rather tell others how I should be buried, or what kind of burial items I want. He tusked and shook his head. Klein nodded indiscernibly. Controlling the world, he said hoarsely, the fountain of unaging is a scam. He used absolutely certain words, without any additional words, that would signify other possibility. The fountain of unaging is a scam. Katlia looked at the world before retracting her gaze in thought. It seemed to corroborate with certain theories and guesses she had. Alger frowned, not that he didn't agree with the world's judgment, or that he believed that Miss Justice's and Mr. Moon's explanations were devoid of reason. Instead, he realized that he had completely failed to consider this possibility. To him, this was a mistake he shouldn't have committed. After all these years, I'm still being temporarily blinded by immense profit. He fell silent for a few seconds and sighed. After exchanging what everyone had seen and heard recently, everyone began to teach little son ancient Hermes, and they learned some mysticism from each other. Time quickly passed as the fool Klein surveyed the area after everyone came to a stop. Let's end it here for today. By your will. Audrey stood up immediately and curtsied with her illusory dress. The rest of the members said the same almost at the same time. As he watched the blurry figures vanish before his eyes, Klein wasn't in a rush to leave. He conjured a goatskin and fountain pen and wrote down the divination statement, the hope for my advancement to sequence 4. Putting down the fountain pen, Klein held the goatskin and leaned back. As he closed his eyes, he entered a cogitation state and began silently reciting the divination statement. After chanting it 7 times, he quickly fell asleep and entered the dream world. The gray, blurry sky cracked open as he saw a towering mountain tear through the clouds. At the mountaintop, there was a collapsed palace whose walls were covered with weeds and moss as they showed obvious holes. Inside the palace's hall was a huge throne carved out of stone. It was adorned with dull gemstones and gold. It was mostly mottled and damaged. It looked as though it wasn't prepared for a human, as countless translucent maggots were bunched densely together. They squirmed slowly as they kept growing. Round the throne was a raving that seemed to penetrate the long rivers of time and history. It was illusory, ethereal, and constantly echoing. Hornicis phlegrea, Hornicis phlegrea, Hornicis phlegrea. The moment the ravings entered his ear, Klein jolted awake before he frowned. It really is the main peak of the Hornicis mountain range. Furthermore, I can see and hear it more clearly than before. This made him recall Queen Mystic Bernadette's prophetic words. Your fate lies on the main peak of the Hornicis mountain range. Is that my fate? It really makes me want to be rebellious and not go. Sigh, I can't deal with absolutes. It depends. Klein sighed and conjured the 5 bounty notices provided by Emlyn White. Combining the information he had, he used the methods of divination to find the locations of the primordial moon believers. Finally, due to his lack of information, he could only confirm 2 points. Gully's Kevin, Windsor Bearing, and Argus are all in back. Dandy and Lara are at Inmet Harbor and Pritz Harbor respectively. This is as good as nothing. Klein shook his head and returned to the real world. Recalling how he had already agreed to provide little son with the notary potion formula within 3 days, he wore his coat and a top hat, and he prepared to head out to find a target. When he opened the door and came to the stairwell, he saw Anderson Hood walking up, twirling his deer-hunting cap with his hand while humming a folk song. This fellow is really good at recovering from setbacks. He was just taught a lesson by a demigod in the morning and was forced to apologize and agree to a request, but I don't see any sign of trauma from him anymore. It's no wonder he became a Sequence 5 powerhouse. Just this state of mind alone makes it difficult for him to lose control. Klein looked at him, nodding slightly as a greeting. Good afternoon, Jayaman. Anderson chuckled as he waved his hand. I've received the bounty and characteristic money. I'll pay you the rest now. As he spoke, he took out stacks of cash of different thickness from different pockets. It happened pretty smoothly, I see, Klein commented without much emotions involved. Anderson immediately laughed. That's right. It happened far smoother than I imagined. Those fellows who should have rocks for brains were surprisingly friendly, polite, and efficient. I even suspect whether I've become a blessed of lady luck. There's no such deity. Klein ruthlessly shattered his fantasies. Why so serious? It's life. Relax a little. Relax a little. Anderson handed over the remaining 1,200 pounds. Actually, I'm very clear about what happened. That gentleman doesn't want me to waste my time, so he secretly exhorted those people. Klein glanced at the cash, pressed down on it, and asked in passing, have you confirmed which pirates gave you the problem? He was asking about the prey that resulted in the manipulator's involvement. There's no way for confirmation, Anderson said with a bitter smile. Do you think I didn't confirm it ahead of time? Although I appear nonchalant in front of you, I will investigate the prey's background and situation ahead of time to avoid provoking someone I can't afford to. Who knows, Sai, I can only blame it on my bad luck. This fellow is more careful than I thought. That's right. His previous sequence was called Conspirer. Klein thought in enlightenment before asking indifferently, who deserves death the most in this area? Anderson was taken aback before he chuckled. Does our craziest adventure plan on beginning his hunting activity. However, you have to consider it well. I do not wish for you to be my partner when completing the demigod's mission. Don't worry, we're different. I'm a seer. I have all kinds of means to hide my tracks. I will not allow someone to come knocking at my door. Besides, that's a demigod of the spectator pathway. He's not good at divination or prophecies. Klein maintained his cold attitude that was unique to Jamin and said, You don't have to bother. Anderson immediately gave a thumbs up. Your craziness is worthy of praise. He thought for a moment and added, The person who deserves death the most is Mulsona from the Lone's new party. He's one of the pirate's best friends. He has in his control some kind of plant that's similar to cannabis, which is highly addictive. This helps him control many people in the Toscarter government and the police department. He's one of the most powerful mob bosses over here. He has committed many crimes, killed plenty of people, and basically did it with the help of pirates. On the surface, there's no apparent problem. He isn't a Beyonder, but the difficulty in killing him is how troublesome it is. Yes, troublesome. He has 3 to 5 Beyonders from different pirate crews, providing him with protection. On the rooftops, outside the building, beneath the windows, everyone there belongs to him. Finish him off. The only way is to forcefully storm in and kill a large number of people. I have the means to do it, but it's too troublesome. There's also a certain level of danger. You'll become a wanted criminal after that, so I didn't deal with him and only dealt with his safe at home. Safe to talk about banditry in such a fresh way. Yes, I previously heard that Toscarter's main industries are its plantation economy and pirates' black market trading. It also has flourishing bar, brothel, and gambling industry. I never expected that it includes new age drugs. Mulsona is an ordinary person and not a Beyonder. Perfect, creeping hunger happens to lack food. Klein nodded and indicated for Anderson to go deeper into detail. Evening in the Oak Tree Bar. A boxing match was about to unfold in the boxing ring. Many alcoholics surrounded it with mugs in hand. They were like sharks who had caught the scent of blood. As they placed their bets, they loudly yelled words such as kill him. This was a business of the head of the Lone's new party, Mulsona. The unique thing about the boxing matches held here was that death was permitted. Mulsona greatly enjoyed matches that resembled ancient wrestling competition. He often came to watch a few matches. At that moment he was seated on the second story, overlooking the ring. Round him were several bodyguards. They were watching every direction, and among them were no lack of Beyonders sent from the pirates he worked with, as well as experienced adventurers he hired with large sums of money. These people either had their backs or sides facing Mulsona as they surrounded him, and they prevented anyone from approaching him. Revolvers, rifles, and hunting rifles were all aimed outside to leave the masses intimidated. After confirming the situation, Klein pressed down on his top hat, entered the bar, and saw Mulsona sucking on a cigar. This mob boss had a very discernible face. Be it his brandy nose or thin brows, they were all very unique. Klein retracted his gaze and first went to the bar to get a cup of local malt beer worth 4 pence. Then he made his way to the railing beneath the second floor. Although he wasn't directly under Mulsona, as it was heavily guarded, he was already not very far from him. I'm within 5 meters, Klein silently muttered to himself, raised his cup of beer and looked at the boxing ring. Well, black spirit body threads that stemmed from different lifeforms appeared in Klein's vision, but he didn't immediately extend his spirituality to attempt to control them. After distinguishing and confirming which spirit body threads belonged to Mulsona, he gulped a mouthful of malt beer as he began to focus on the boxing match in the ring, just like a real member of the audience. The 2 boxers had their tops bare and didn't wear any protective gear. They fought all out, constantly clashing with each other as fist met flesh, and the situation quickly escalated to a fervor. Many of the alcoholic gamblers had adrenaline pumping through them as they shouted for the boxer they supported passionately, yelling, "Kill him! Finish that son of a beach!" On the second floor, Molsona also forgot the cigar in his hand as he was fixated on the ring below, his hands clenched tightly into fists. Apart from those who had to have their backs facing him, because they were keeping tabs on any suspicious people or watching the important regions such as the rooftop or area beneath, the people around him couldn't help but have their eyes peeled to the intense boxing match. Klein raised his hand again, gulping a mouthful of beer as though he was out of breath from the tense atmosphere. At this moment, his spirituality silently extended and grabbed onto the illusory black threads corresponding to Molsona. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The brandy-nosed Molsona was just about to pump his fist a little, as though he was in the ring himself, when he suddenly found his brain go numb. He felt the surroundings abruptly turn on, as though several panes of glass were in between him and them. Molsona immediately discovered that his thoughts had clearly slowed down, as though all the parts in his brain had suddenly rusted. As the target was only an ordinary person whose spirit body was far inferior to that of a Beyonder, Klein took less than 20 seconds to achieve initial control over him. 7 seconds. All it took was 7 seconds. Oh no, something wrong is happening. It's likely a Beyonder with relatively special powers. Molsona, who often interacted with pirates, was no stranger to the mysterious world. It was why he spent large sums of money to hire Beyonders to protect himself. If he hadn't long destroyed his body with sex and alcohol, making his psyche relatively weak and his condition terrible, giving him a high chance of losing control if he were to consume a potion, he would have also wished to obtain supernatural powers himself. At that moment, as his thoughts were slowing down, and due to his lack of experience, Molsona spent more than 10 seconds to figure out that he was under assault. He immediately reached out his arm and opened his mouth in an attempt to shout for help. However, his actions were extremely slow, and his voice was weak. With a number of his bodyguards around him, engrossed in the exciting and nerve-wracking boxing match, and the audiences roaring in an ever-increasing crescendo, as well as all the guards along the perimeter putting their attention on any possible attack locations to protect their employer, his obvious abnormality ended up being neglected. When the climax of the match received a temporary respite, a number of bodyguards and subordinates turned to look back at their boss, and they saw that his eyes appeared somewhat in a daze. His hands didn't seem to be in the right place, as if he was still caught up in the match, anxiously awaiting the final results. The corners of the mob boss's eyes had tears welling up as he tried hard to release his fingers to drop the cigar to attract the attention of his subordinates, but he discovered in despair that his line of thought was becoming highly impeded and stiff. Even a simple action needed more than a minute to complete, and his fingers were even resisting his will. Puh! The burning cigar finally fell to the ground, as Molsona's tears flowed down to his neck across his cheeks. A few bodyguards discovered this, and were just about to ask their boss if it was because the match was too exciting when Molsona suddenly bent down. As he wiped his face, he picked up the cigar. "That was an excellent match. Give the victor more money." Molsona flicked the cigar and pulled up his collar as he grinned happily. He didn't say exactly how much was to be given, as Klein didn't know the market rates. All he could do was give a vague comment. Yes, Molsona of the Loan's new party had already become his marionette. As this mob boss was only an ordinary person, and his spirit body was even weaker than most healthy humans, all it took was 2 minutes and 15 seconds. If the time needed was any longer, he would have had to divert his attention to create an illusion to create some chaos, making the bodyguards place their attention on protecting Molsona and not being able to discover his abnormality in time. "Kill him! Kill him!" The shouts of the audience suddenly turned uniform as the match in the ring came to its end. Molsona also allowed his bodyguard to continue watching the match. When a boxer collapsed to the ground unconscious, Molsona took a swig of his cigar and said, "To the lounge. I want to take a break." "Yes, boss." His bodyguards and subordinates immediately surrounded him, escorted him to the corridor on the second floor, and helped him open the door to the lounge. After instructing his guards to guard different critical spots and to not disturb him, Molsona paced around and opened a safe. He found documents involving all kinds of new drugs and selected the most important one. Following that, he placed the documents and an address he cut from the newspapers, as well as a total of £758 in cash into a briefcase. With a creak, he opened the door and called for a subordinate. "Throw this bag under the 3rd Street lamp around the alley." "Yes, boss." The subordinate didn't inquire why. This was a rule. After closing the door again, Mulsona found 3 candles and items with spirituality, and used a pen and paper to carefully draw the corresponding symbol of the fool, a half-pupilless eye which represented secrecy, and the contorted lines which represented change. Then this mob boss who had become a marionette lit the candles, used cologne to represent essential oil and extract, and solemnly held a bestowment ritual. He softly chanted the fool's honorific name, and he used ancient Hermes, which he originally didn't know, to recite the corresponding incantation. Following that, he picked up the item with spirituality and let it fuse into the wind, constructing an illusory door with a transformed candlelight. If he couldn't find any items with spirituality, Klein had planned on using Mulsona's blood. Human's blood was an item with spirituality to begin with. In the washroom on the 1st floor, Klein took this opportunity by taking 4 steps counterclockwise and going above the gray fog. He didn't use the Black Emperor card, and instead, he directly stirred some of the powers of the mysterious space, combining it with the paper figurine before throwing it through the bestowment door. The pitch blackness immediately transformed into an angel with 12 pairs of wings. It flew through the illusory and mysterious door, passing through the pitch-black depths of the void and arriving where Mulsona was. This was to disrupt any subsequent investigations via divination, prophecy, or other beyonder power. Right on the heels of that, Klein picked up Creeping Hunger and threw it into the ritual's door. Creeping Hunger arrived in the real world thanks to the bestowment ritual, and it arrived in front of Mulsona. Having not eaten for a long time, it immediately became restless. At this moment, Klein, who had returned to the washroom, controlled the frozen Mulsona from a distance of dozens of meters away to immediately close his mouth and pick up the glove on the altar. A crack opened in the middle of the glove as 2 rows of illusory, white, and eerie teeth were revealed. The senses of the marionette he obtained quickly weakened as he decisively severed his control. The slight backlash made his mind spin, but it didn't take long for him to recover. Then, as though nothing had happened, he left the washroom, returned to the bar counter, and continued drinking the malt beer he didn't finish earlier. At the same time, he found a rat on the 2nd floor through the use of spirit body threads, and he made it become his marionette in less than 2 minutes. The rat began searching for a tunnel and path with rather awkward and unfamiliar motions, and it took quite some time before entering Mulsona's lounge through a hole hidden by a bookshelf. At this moment, a thin glove that resembled human skin lay silently on the ground as there was nothing left behind of Mulsona, not even his clothes. The rat climbed up to the table and bit on the paper with the symbol corresponding to the fool, placing it close to the burning can. The paper quickly ignited and burned to ashes. After extinguishing the 3 candles and returning them to their original locations, the rat came beside Creeping Hunger and bit onto it. Then it returned via its original path and left Mulsona's lounge. It stealthily ran all the way to the balcony facing the outside on the 2nd story, and it silently climbed down. On the 1st story, where the bar counter was, Klein finished drinking his last mouthful of beer, put down the cup, and slowly stood up. He pressed down on his half-top hat, stuffed his hands into the black double-breasted frock coat, and walked past the alcoholics and gamblers without any haste and came to the streets. Following the light of the street lamps, he entered the alley at a normal pace. While pulling out a paper figurine and lighting it with a flick, he picked up the briefcase thrown under the 3rd Street lamp. At this moment, a gray rat came with a thin human-skinned glove in its mouth out of the shadow. Klein bent his back with a deadpan expression once again and picked up Creeping Hunger. Then the gray rat left on its own, climbing into a rubbish chute and lying there until it lost its breath. With night about to fall, the street lamp illuminated Klein as he stood there, spreading his fingers in an unhurried manner while wearing Creeping Hunger on his left hand. After stretching his finger joints and getting used to the glove, he carried the briefcase and followed the still vibrant and lively oak tree bar before vanishing at the crossroad. He took out the address slip and stamps from the briefcase and left only with the important documents, pasting them onto it. Then he placed it in a mailbox on the corner of the street. Finally, Klein changed back into J.M. and Sparrow, took a rental carriage, and headed for another bar around the pier. It was a bar provided by Anderson that had relatively more pirates. Upon entering the bar, Klein swept his gaze and took in the interior. Suddenly, he saw a familiar figure. The figure had a medium-sized build, and his lips were purple. His brown eyes hid an intense maleficence that left one afraid. He was none other than the second mate of the king of immortality Agalido, Slaughter Kerches, with a bounty of 9,500 pounds. Clearly, after escaping via the exit of the dangerous waters, the death announcer had arrived in the nearby Toscarter Island in search of replenishments. So you are here as well. The corners of Klein's mouth curled up slightly, discovering in a chance encounter the devil who couldn't be more suitable for hunting. Just as he generated that ill intent, Kerches sensed him and turned his head to the entrance of the bar. Klein didn't hesitate to grab a beer on the table beside him and threw it over. Right on the heels of that, he drew his revolver and coldly aimed. Bang! Catcha! Kerches only half turned his body as the cup of beer hit the round table beside him, smashing to pieces. Amidst the gunfire, he didn't attempt to dodge, as though he had instinctively seen through the illusion. It was as though he had a spring installed in him, as he bounced to the forefront amongst the gamblers and alcoholics who were crouched down or scattered. His gaze was locked onto the cold adventurer, wearing a suit by the door. Jamin Sparrow, Kerches's pupils constricted as he opened his mouth and chanted the language of foulness that stemmed from the abyss. At this moment, Klein truly pulled the trigger as a pale golden bullet that appeared to be scooped out of boiling hot water shot out, going straight for the slaughterer, who had a bounty of 9,500 pounds. However, all Kerches did was gently lift his right hand and spread his fingers to produce a light blue flame in his palm. Then he grabbed the bullet in an unimaginable manner. The bullet entered a cage as the light blue flame solidified. Following that, the bullet emitted sunlight, just enough of it to neutralize everything. Two figures stood up beside Kerches. One of them was a short-haired woman wielding dual pistols, and the other was a boorish man in boxing gloves. Clearly, Kerches didn't come to Toscarter's pier in search for supplies alone. Or it should be said that he definitely had partners he knew here. 3 Bayunders, Kerches might even be a Sequence 5. At that moment, Klein nearly blurted out something along the lines of "Sorry, my bad." One couldn't make any preparations when attacking a devil, relying on complete chance. Furthermore, there couldn't be any hesitation. Otherwise, the devil would immediately detect the ill intent and danger. However, under such situations, it was truly hard to tell who held the advantage in such situation. Klein didn't hesitate to turn around while holding his revolver. Then he agilely dashed for the staircase leading to the bar's second story amidst the crowd and above the crouching alcoholics. Just as he dashed in, a light blue fireball smashed into the side of the staircase before instantly exploding. Boom! A tiny part of the bottom of the staircase collapsed as the bar began to tremble. The strong smell of sulfur spread. Kerches and his 2 companions didn't delay as they jumped across the first few steps of the staircase in fervent pursuit of Jamin Sparrow. Taboo, taboo, taboo. Klein ran for the second story, and midway, he quickly began his examination of the corresponding spirit-body threads. This allowed him to easily find an empty room without any human. He turned around, took a step, and was about to enter the door before jumping off the window to escape from the bar. At that moment, Kerches and his 2 companions chased up to the second story, and upon seeing this scene, they tacitly split up. The former continued the pursuit, while the latter entered the rooms on the same side in a bid to head down to intercept Jamin. And Klein was waiting precisely for this opportunity. He suddenly half-turned his body as his left black-gloved hand grabbed at the air. The woman with the dual pistols and the man in boxing gloves continued their actions without detecting any abnormality. They rushed into the other rooms, jumped off the windows, and went far away without returning. Their goal and actions of separate and intercept had allowed Klein to use the Baron of Corruption's distortion to change it to separate and take action alone. This wouldn't last very long, but it was enough time for Klein to fight Kerches one-on-one for a brief moment. Boom! Having completed distortion, he fell to the ground, rolling inside the building and avoiding the light blue fireball which Kerches kept shooting out. Midst the incessant booming, the buildings where the bar originally was wavered as though it had experienced an earthquake. Right on the heels of that, Kerches rapidly lunged forward, entering the rather vast room. Seeing Jamin Sparrow adeptly somersaulting and jumping without fighting him head-on while also controlling his emotions very well, Slaughterer immediately opened his mouth and used the unique language of foulness to say the word, "slow." The entire room, and all the objects inside seemed to calm down. Klein's somersaulting action slowed down significantly and weren't as smooth as before. Kerchay's didn't hesitate to lock onto his target as he followed up with another word of the devil language. Die. Klein's figure instantly froze as he stood rooted on the spot and gradually turned faint and thin, becoming a paper figurine filled with spotted red rust. At the same time, he surfaced by the side of the door, wearing a half-top hat and black double-breasted frock suit. He reached out his black-gloved hand, grabbed the handle, and shut the door to the collapsing room with a pull. Krieg. The din outside vanished as the room seemed to stand out alone, becoming a firm cage. Upon seeing this, Kerchay's body swelled as his clothes tore. He instantly transformed into a behemoth nearly 3 meters tall. His skin appeared dark, but it was dark black and sinister. Goat horns filled with countless mysterious patterns grew on his head, as a pair of bat wings on his back spread open. Swirling around him were light blue flames that emitted the strong smell of sulfur. Su, su, su. Light blue fireballs shot out in unison, blanketing the region around the door. At the same time, the redness in Kerchay's eyes bloomed as he said with the extremely corruptive words of the devil, corruption. This was also an area of effect attack. The light blue in his eyes filled up as Klein clenched his left hand, which wore a sinister and noble glove, and quickly did a half-twist. Fireballs immediately lost their trajectories and acted chaotically as though in random motion. They smashed into the ceiling, the door ground or flew backward at Kerchay. Immediately, the booming sounds in the room undulated. The seal created by the power of distortion suffered an intense blow as it trembled, but it didn't show any signs of damage. The light blue flame soared into the sky as the smell of sulfur spread. Klein's body suddenly bent down as his body was covered in a layer of clearly sticky black liquid. Bang! His figure exploded, turning into torn pieces of paper and corrupted black fog. Immediately following that, he surfaced on the other side, his skin a clear dark shade. His clothes were torn from the explosive force and the flames from the abyss. Corruption, which had splashed damage, was useful against his paper figurine substitutes to a certain extent, inflicting damage to a certain degree via an unavoidable influence. And the aftermath of the explosion wasn't within Klein's control. Similarly, it dealt damage to him. However, upon their first encounter, Klein had given Kerchay's a cup of beer, completing the bribe. Therefore, attacks and control effects directed at him were greatly negated. Kerchay's clearly didn't expect the minor influence that corruption had dealt to J.M. and Sparrow. Just as he pulled out, a long blade formed entirely of flames, and before he could unleash his speed and strength in a fervent attack, he saw his opponent's left hand's glove transform as though it was made of gold. 2 blinding streaks of lightning tore out of Klein's eye. Psychic piercing. Kerchay's instantly let out a tragic cry as he felt as though 100 bottles of holy water had been infused into his mind. He was rich in actual combat experience, and knowing that having been struck by a psyche attack, knew that he would subsequently suffer a series of relentlessness attacks. Hence, he instinctively transformed into a pitch-black liquid and began spreading across the floor. The liquid appeared to be the coalescence of the darkest and evilest desires of a person's heart, as the liquid spread across the room towards J.M. and Sparrow, as though it would corrupt everything. This state is truly perfect. In a battle encounter, either party would suffer the problem of not being sufficiently prepared. Thankfully, I've always remembered the suspected desire apostle I encountered, and I've completely held back all desires and emotions. Klein didn't dodge as the glove on his left hand rapidly bloomed with pure and clean sunlight. He spread out his arms, allowing a pillar of holy light that had golden flames swirling around it descend from the sky. It illuminated every corner and every shadow of the room. The column of light struck the richest parts of the pitch-black liquid as it radiated outwards in a rippling manner. Amidst the bright and holy light, the pitch-black liquid quickly evaporated and mostly vanished. Kerchay's hurriedly materialized his body and reformed near the window. He still maintained his state as a 3-meter-tall devil. He was as calm as always, but he could hardly hold back his intense bloodlust and desire to kill. The present him was already rather weak. He didn't dare to circle around J.M. and Sparrow, as he waited for him to show any emotion so as to control his desire. He ignited the 2 mysterious goat horns on his head in an attempt to forcefully attack his enemy's psyche, inducing emotions to a certain degree in an unavoidable manner. Once he had any desires or emotions, the situation would be in the desire apostle's control. At that moment, Kirchez's head suddenly turned numb, causing him to nearly lose the thoughts he previously had. After both parties entered a range of 5 meters, the reason why Klein remained in a passive state, using paper figurine substitutes and a Baron of Corruption's distortion powers to barely put up a fight and stall for time, was to divert attention in order to control Kirchez's spirit body threat. With the strength of a Sequence 5 spirit body, it wasn't easy to obtain initial control over Slaughterer to begin with. However, with the cup of beer bribe, it reduced Kirchez's defense and resistance. And after that, this desire apostle suffered a psychic piercing and was thoroughly purified once by light of purification. As a result, he had become rather weak. Therefore, even though Klein was using his other powers, he still took 15 seconds to obtain initial control over Kirchez. The intense battle in the room instantly turned quiet. Although Kirchez's thoughts had turned slow, he still had the ability to complete certain actions. He could still forcefully resist the control that stemmed from the depths of his spirit body. The bloodshot colors in his eyes converged as his eyes reflected Jamin Sparrow's figure. The curled goat horns on his head began to burn intensely as hatred, greed, lust, wrath, and other emotions and desires began to spread outwards in a corporeal manner. Klein entered a half-cogitation state as he calmly focused on deepening his control, hoping to quickly make Kirchez lose all means of resistance. Disconnection in the room that had been reduced to shambles. Klein, whose top hat had fallen to the side and clothes had become tattered, was about 4 meters away from Kirchez, who was a behemoth with bat wing. The situation was so quiet, as though a puppet show was being played. In fact, Klein still had the means to do something else. Back when Mariontist Resego forcefully controlled both him and Sharon, he could resist the Wraith's possession and use flame controlling to summon a flame to destroy the shadow pulled in by Sharon. If he hadn't made a serious mistake by targeting the Sequence 5 Wraith, Resego could have diverted his attention to killing Klein, snuffing out any chance of him using the language of foulness charm. Now, although Klein was definitely inferior to him, there was also only one enemy. Of course, there wasn't really much he could do. Under the premise of not losing control over Kirchez, he could move, but he couldn't do it too hastily or quickly. He could use Beyonder powers which didn't expend too much of his spirituality, but he couldn't divert his attention to power the mystical items he carried, or use actions that required too much movement like drawing a gun. And when a target was controlled to a certain extent, several attacks could nudge or stimulate the target, allowing them to resist the control of their spirit body threads to a greater extent and even show signs of escaping from his control. Therefore, Klein had to wait. At that moment, his heart rate suddenly sped up as an uncontrollable sense of horror and anxiety surfaced in his mind. He couldn't help but suspect that Kirchez's companions who had their intentions affected by distortion were about to return. No good. My emotions have been stirred. Klein was first taken aback as he tried to use cogitation to forcefully calm his agitated heart. Haha, he has emotional stirrings a chance. Kirchez was delighted as a slow thought flashed through his mind. Then, using his Beyonder powers, he attempted to magnify Jamin Sparrow's horror and anxiety, planting an emotional seed in him. As long as he succeeded, all he needed was to completely trigger it, maiming his opponent, making him unable to influence him further. No, how can it be ineffective? His emotional stirrings have disappeared. Kirchez's bloodshot eyes constricted slowly as it was gradually filled with shock, alarm, and anger. Klein, who imagined that he had given the Desire Apostle a chance to counterattack, discovered that nothing had happened after completely calming himself down. The curled goat horns on Kirchez's head were ignited, but he didn't attempt to use his emotional stirring. Moments after having this thought, Klein roughly understood the situation. It wasn't that Kirchez didn't wish to control his horror and anxiety, but it was that he had failed. From the moment he sensed the emotional stirrings, he had to take a few seconds to digest the situation before using 2 to 3 seconds to make the decision. Finally, he spent even more time to organize his thoughts before channeling the corresponding Beyonder power. All of that took him at least 10 seconds to complete. Klein only took a total of 3 to 4 seconds to calm his mind after detecting the problem. Therefore, Kirchez's Beyonder powers naturally failed to be effective against an enemy who was in normal condition. To put it simply, the delay was too long. Under such situations, don't try to fiddle around with highly intricate matters, Klein lampooned before suppressing his sense of schadenfreude. After another 10 seconds, Kirches finally understood the source of the problem. He no longer considered targeting desires and emotions, and instead, while flapping the bat wings on his back with great difficulty, he relied on a devil's powerful body and spirit body to resist the controls stemming from the spirit body threads. He tried to make the swirling light blue flames slowly coagulate into a fireball. Klein could almost foresee fireballs bombard him, hence, he didn't hesitate to split off some of his spirituality, snapping his fingers using his right thumb and middle finger. Puh! The light blue flames suddenly soared before they truly took form and collapsed completely. They were like fireworks blooming behind Kirches. Magician's flame controlling. Kirches continued struggling, but his actions became even slower as he resembled a rusting puppet. As for Klein, he casually moved his feet to dodge the devil language Kirches had launched with all his strength. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. Klein suddenly stopped as his eyes locked onto Kirch's head, which had lost its curved goat horn. At that moment, he still needed 2.5 minutes from controlling this desire apostle to turn him into his marionette, but Klein didn't have such plan. He never had such plans in the first place. It took too much time, allowing Kirch's companions to rush back in time. Klein only had one ultimate goal. It was to control Kirches to a certain extent, so that attacks within a certain limit wouldn't help him escape his predicament. The bloodshot eyes, grimacing expression, and sharp teeth with drooling saliva reflected in Klein's eye. He opened his mouth and said a word, bang. Air bullet. An air bullet of a sequence 5. This was already comparable to a bullet shot from a steam rifle. Bang. The air bullet accurately hit Kirch's forehead, causing him to throw up his head, yanking the spirit body threads. In between his brows, a bloody hole that wasn't too deep had appeared. It wasn't a mortal blow. To a devil, a desire apostle, their bodies seemed to be cloaked with thick and hard armor. Their blood and flesh had extreme elasticity and defensive strength. Bam! 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 Klein kept creating air bullets while making gunshot sounds, striking Kirch's forehead, again and again, slowly leaving it a contiguous mess. At the same time, he stably controlled the spirit body threads to prevent him from using the feedback to weaken his influence. Kirches let out an angry stuttering roar as he tried moving forward in a bid to counterattack, but Klein was a lot more agile than him, and his plans to liquefy undoubtedly failed because of the control of the spirit body threads. Bang! Another air bullet struck Kirches, completely shattering his forehead, penetrating his brain. Bang! 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 The subsequent bullets flew in, one bullet after another. Bang! Kirch's skull was finally sent flying, as black crevices filled his brain. At that moment it was a complete mess. The aura of this slaughterer worth 9,500 pounds quickly dissipated, but he didn't close his eyes, as he had already lost them. Bit by bit, he collapsed to the ground slowly as Klein walked over and extended his left hand. 2 blood-red eyes split open in the middle of the glove. A cold and eerie wind appeared as Slaughterer Kirch's spirit body, as well as his black fog-like Beyonder characteristic shot towards creeping hunger amidst screams before fixing itself to a blank finger. Soon the glove turned black once again, but this time it was profound and pure, resembling countless squirming dots of the same color formed one layer after another. Klein sensed the changes for 2 seconds before walking towards the shattered window, feeling somewhat disappointed and also somewhat delighted. When grazing Kirches, he had actually considered which Beyonder powers he wished to receive and which he didn't wish to receive. The one he didn't wish for was the danger premonition of a devil, as this needed to have creeping hunger constantly activated while maintaining Kirch's soul. And this meant that he needed to feed the glove every day, which spelled an extreme inconvenience for himself. Furthermore, this also overlapped with his powers as a seer to a certain extent. As for whether the danger premonition of a devil worked after making it into his marionette, Klein believed that it was targeted on the marionette and had nothing to do with its controller. What Klein wished for the most was to draw the desire apostle's Beyonder powers of using a target's emotional stirrings or the use of any of the language of foulness, with the best being death or corruption. At that moment, he had been quite lucky to obtain 3 Beyonder powers. One of them was language of foulness, but it wasn't death or corruption but slow. This allowed all targets in a 7 to 8 meter radius to instantly turn numb or even come to a halt. However, it could only be maintained for 2 seconds. The second Beyonder power was Sword of Lava. It could create a flaming sword with extremely high offensive power. One strike could directly cleave through a thick stone column, leaving the sliced-off end to appear to be melted off. This was the option Kirches had used when he attacked maniacally. The third was sulfur fireball. Not only could it create an explosion of considerable might, but it could also poison people and objects which had been stained by the flame. If matched with a devil form's powers, 10 to 20 fireballs could be launched at the same instant. Out of that form, it maxed out at 3. That's not bad. The damage delivered by Sword of Lava to non-undead or non-corrupt creatures is clearly higher than the Priest of Light's Light of Holiness. Klein came to the window and happened to see the backs of Kirch's companions opening up a distance from him. They haven't shaken off the influence. No, with so much time having passed, they must have shaken off the influence and returned somewhere nearby. Now they're escaping. They sensed Kirch's death. That's a little weird. Klein turned his head back and saw Kirch's corpse still in his devil form. His form didn't change back into a human as a result of his death. He looked at the corpse for 2 seconds before coming up with a theory. Powers like the devil form are a state that brings a body close to the state of losing control. However, they still have their reasoning and can change back while they're in control. Otherwise, they will maintain their forms. Klein didn't delay as he searched the devil's corpse. He discovered that Kirch's gigantification had torn all his clothes and pants, causing his wallet and cash to scatter across the ground. Later, they were all destroyed due to the blanketing attack from the fireballs and sulfurous flame. See, just as Klein looked away, he suddenly discovered something twinkling in the giant devil's chest. It was a thin and long crystal formed purely of blood. A faint smell of sulfur emanated around it. What's that? Klein frowned, unable to figure out an answer. Kirch's Beyonder characteristics has clearly entered creeping hunger. Why would his corpse produce something strange? A question flashed across Klein's mind. Furthermore, as the second mate of the King of Immortality, Kirches didn't even carry a mystical item or sealed artifact. This had exceeded his expectation. Complete ritual. After thinking for a moment, Klein, who didn't have an answer, put away the thin blood crystal when he didn't sense any danger from it. Then he bent down to inspect Kirch's devil form, which had lost half its head. I wonder if I can still use this to exchange for a bounty, and if so, how much can I get? I have no idea who I can contact from the military over here. Send Oz Kent a telegram. This back and forth, together with the work he has to do remotely, it's hard to tell if it will finish in 3 to 4 days. I'll be leaving tomorrow. Also, I can't forget the middleman's cut. He mumbled, walked to the side, and picked up the clearly charred half-top hat and wore it. Then he dragged the heavy and massive devil's corpse and walked to the door before reaching out to open the door. A howling wind blew in, breaking the silence in the room. Klein tapped his finger joint to deactivate the spirit body thread's vision as he continued dragging the nasty and terrifying devil's corpse across the corridor, down the stairs to the first floor. At that moment, there weren't many people left in the bar. Tables and chairs were overturned, and there were shards everywhere. It was a mess. Klein went past the heavily damaged staircase and into the main hall. He surveyed the area and found the forlorn bar owner behind the bar counter. Few of the bouncers he hired had remained. Most had scattered off. Tap, tap, tap. Klein walked over one step at a time with the devil corpse behind him, bumping into the furniture. What are you planning to do? The owner took a step back as he yelled at the top of his lungs. His bouncers gathered over, shuddering in fear. Their eyes were darting around as their bodies revealed their own inclination. It appeared as though they would immediately flee the moment any incident happened. Klein stopped in his tracks, throwing Kirch's corpse in front of him. Then he said in a deep voice, "Can you claim bounty rewards?" The owner was stunned for a second as he instinctively moved his gaze down, foreseeing the huge devil's corpse, which still had some blue flames lingering around. He and his bouncers drew a cold gasp at the same time, many of them feeling surreal. This was a real devil. Apart from its lack of curled goat horns, it looked identical to the devils described in the church's Bibles or mythical story. To ordinary people living in the pirates' playground, it wasn't rare to witness supernatural powers. Here, their horizons were clearly broader than the colonies of Orevi and the civilians of the kingdom's native soil. However, as the owner and bouncers of a bar, they had never seen real devils before. They even suspected that it was an attempt by the church to tarnish unofficial Beyonder. The owner retracted his gaze with great difficulty as he looked at the stoic adventurer in tattered clothes. It can. They should have the means to determine that this is Kirche. TD's Kirche is right. Klein silently heaved a sigh of relief and silently nodded. The owner hesitated for 2 seconds and forced a fearful smile. However, it's impossible to get everything. As you know, there will be some money spent during the process. The fees cost about 30%, otherwise you'll have to wait quite a while. After all, £9,500 isn't a small sum. For Toscarter's pier, it will take at least a week. It's because there are pirates frequenting this area, and there are often adventurers here to claim bounty. Therefore, it constantly has quite a bit of cash reserve. If you were in Oravi Island or anywhere else, it might take 2 weeks or even a month. £9,500 really wasn't a small sum. Klein clearly remembered that back in Tingen City, the Nighthawks team's monthly budget was only about £1,000. The budget was even split between the church and the police department. He thought for a moment and asked the bar's boss, "Do you know me?" "Yes." The owner hurriedly nodded. Klein swept his gaze across everyone and continued asking, "Can you figure out where I'm living?" "Yes, yes." The owner didn't dare to lie. Klein tersely responded before using a flat and direct tone. "Send £6,000 to me before noon tomorrow." £6,000. That's less than 70%. That's about £600 short. The owner was taken aback, never expecting the crazy adventurer to take the initiative to lower the price. "Can you do it?" Klein asked again. The additional £650 was his compensation for the bar. After all, he had left the bar in a mess. However, this wasn't something the crazy adventurer would say himself. He believed that the bar's owner wasn't a philanthropist. There was no way he would hand over the excess to others. The owner considered it seriously before replying, "Yes." Even though the official process wouldn't be that fast, there was nothing he needed to worry about. This was because he planned on borrowing some of the money and using his savings to pay the bounty reward which Jam and Sparrow won. To be able to earn several £100s at once wasn't something he would miss out on. Klein nodded and didn't speak another word. He turned around and walked to the bar's entrance. When he came near, he took out a few yellow pennies and threw them onto a tiny round table that still stood standing. After some clinking sounds, the pennies spun to a stop. They numbered 8 pence. While doing this action, the black-suited Klein didn't stop walking. His figure soon disappeared from the entrance. "What's the meaning of that?" the owner said with a surprised and blank look. Most of the bouncers shook their heads with the same expression, indicating that they didn't know Jam and Sparrow's motive. Only a bouncer who had been standing guard by the door thought with a frown. Then he said uncertainty. When he first entered, he took someone's cup of beer and threw it at Kirche. This is the compensation for that cup of beer, as well as the cup. The bar fell into silence once again. Although the owner and bouncers couldn't accept such an explanation, they had the baffling feeling that this matched the style of the crazy adventurer, Jam and Sparrow. Another set of clothes ruined. "That's nearly £9, thankfully. I made quite a lot this time, yes. I'll have to make another set tomorrow." After turning into another street, Klein stopped and observed himself. He wasn't in a rush to return to the hotel he stayed at. He first followed the information provided by the head honcho of the Lone's new party, Mulsona, and found a policeman who was controlled by drugs. The man helped the gangs commit several sordid deeds, to the point of creating a scheme to kill a witness. He channeled his spirit to confirm his crimes, before allowing creeping hunger to enjoy a true feast for the day. After doing that, Klein returned to his hotel via carriage and entered his room. After setting up the altar, he used a ritual to send creeping hunger and the thin blood crystal above the gray fog. Sitting at the end of the long bronze table, Klein didn't hesitate to pick up the glove and release the soul of the priest of light. The Sequence 5 powerhouse had a thin face and an elegant bearing. He was an amiable elder, and he wore a simple white clergyman's robe. He bowed to express his gratitude to the mysterious existence who was concealed by the gray fog. Klein gently nodded as a response. Then he conjured pen and paper and wrote down the divination statement, the potion formulas for the sequences above the Sun Pathway Sequence 7. Leaning back into his seat, he began using dream divination to communicate with the spirit. The grayish world quickly changed. He saw the priest of light roll open a piece of brownish goatskin in a room filled with sunlight. On it was a formula written in ancient Fasak. Sequence 6, Notary. Main ingredients: 1 set of crystallized roots of the Tree of Elders, 5 feathers of a spirit pack bird. Supplementary ingredients: 100 ml of Radiant Spirit Pack Trees juice, 1 golden-rimmed sunflower, 1 white-rimmed sunflower, 5 drops of aqua fern juice. After the scene paused for a few seconds, ripples surfaced again, outlining an opulent hall filled with golden statues. Inside the hall, a man covered in pure light that prevented one from looking straight at him said to a half-centenarian elder, "This is the potion formula for the priest of light. Remember, dispel the darkness and praise the sun." The elder received it in excitement and spread open the ancient goatskin. Sequence 5, Priest of Light. Main ingredients: red comb of a dawn rooster, a pure white brilliance rock. Supplementary ingredients: 5 grams of rosemary, 7 drops of fingered citron juice, 10 ml of rock water, 60 ml of a king of dawn rooster's blood. Ritual: in pure darkness, bury your entire body in ice that usually doesn't melt before consuming the potion. The scene quickly vanished without any additional content. Klein wasn't surprised. He knew very well that, when it involved the domain of a demigod, the 7 churches would often directly provide the potions and rituals without giving them the formula. At this moment, the Priest of Light's figure had mostly dispersed due to the forceful spirit channeling. His painful expression eased as he raised his head and spread out his arms as though he was embracing sunlight. "Praise the sun." The Priest of Light closed his eyes as he piously said. Those were his last words as his spirit body rapidly disintegrated and plummeted into the gray fog before completely disappearing. A pious believer, Klein sighed in comment. Following that, he recalled what he had seen in the dream and recorded the formula. The main ingredient of a notary is the root crystal of the Tree of Elders. I remember that Miss Justice's psychiatrist potion requires the fruit of the Tree of Elders. From the looks of it, the spectator and sun pathways might be interchangeable at high sequences. The difficulty of the Priest of Light's ritual for most people is to find ice that usually doesn't melt, but it's different for Little Sun. Bury a living person in pure darkness in the forsaken land of the gods might lead to one's disappearance. A method to avoid this has to be figured out. Dispel the darkness and praise the sun is the acting method. Klein considered for a moment before picking up the blood crystal produced by Kirchheise's body. After a few seconds of consideration, he wrote down the corresponding divination statement in a serious manner, its origin. Holding up the item and the piece of paper, Klein chanted softly once more and entered a dream. In the gray, blurry world, he saw the gigantic sailboat, the Death Announcer, with its bow and stern curving up high. He saw Kirchheise climb up a soft ladder and arrive on the deck. Just as this Desire Apostle found his footing, a sticky black fog emanated from the deck's crack. It was filled with a corruptive smell that enveloped Kirchheise within it, corrupting and tainting all the shimmering objects on him, including his body. The gas quickly contracted and entered Kirchheise's chest. The color gradually turned red, as though it was a bloodstain. Finally, everything was restored to normal. Kirchheise genuflected as he said to the deck, "Your will is my will." Great Death Announcer. Following that, the scene shattered as Klein opened his eye. He sat straight and looked at the thin and long blood crystal. In thought, he silently said, "The Death Announcer is alive. A sealed artifact with living traits. This crystal is the source of its control over its crew, and it comes equipped with an intense corruptive force. Therefore, mystical items of low levels will be corrupted by it." Picking up the blood crystal and smelling the faint smell of sulfur, Klein could vaguely sense the corrosive powers hidden deep within. Legend has it that the abyss is an area with the greatest powers of corruption. Even an angel will fall and lose control there. The people guarding the abyss will eventually be assimilated by the abyss. The characteristic shown by the Desire Apostle does match this point. Deepening the assimilation of a Desire Apostle. Klein allowed his thoughts to wander. Soon he noticed a detail. Kirchheise had declared loyalty to the Death Announcer, and not to King of Immortality Agalito. Does this mean that the real King of Immortality is the Death Announcer? Agalito is only its spokesperson, or the administrator to infect targets. Rumor has it that Agalito isn't a demigod and isn't at sequence 4. He relies solely on the Death Announcer to become one of the 4 kings. If that's the case, his actual situation is worse than I expect. He doesn't even have any autonomy, of course. I can't eliminate the possibility that he's a sequence 4, and his relationship with the death announcer is just one of cooperating partner. He's a demon after all. He's crafty and enjoys misleading people. Klein contemplated for a few seconds before attempting another divination to see if he could obtain any revelation for the blood crystal's usage. He wasn't afraid that it would incur huge trouble for him, or it could be said that he was already prepared to receive any. Even if it was connected to the Devil King in the Abyss, it would at most be equivalent to the backlash from the true Creator or eternal blazing sun. Klein believed that the gray fog had the means to defend against and suppress it. This is the first time. I won't have my location locked on, so it's not a big problem. Besides, I already divined its origins, and there wasn't any danger. Therefore, the death announcer definitely isn't a sequence O devil. Isn't that obvious? If it's really a sequence O devil, or a sealed artifact at the level of King of Angels, Ammon, then there's no need to avoid the joint forces of me, Queen Mystic, Admiral of Stars, and Anderson. Klein realized that he had been frightening himself. He began to seriously begin the dream divination. In the blurry world, he saw a world covered with sticky black fog. A monster formed from dark-colored lumps of flesh squirmed over as its body cavity produced a raging roar. Blather. The scene changed, producing an ancient-looking altar which was splashed with fresh blood. Engraved on it were words and symbols filled with a corruptive feeling. It was as though they were shouting something. The hazy world shattered as Klein slowly opened his eyes and sat straight. He tapped his finger on the edge of the long bronze table and muttered to himself. Blatherer refers to the state before the death announcer became a sealed artifact, a blatherer from the abyss. Or was it a gigantic monster formed from dark-colored lumps of flesh that became a sealed artifact after being killed by a blatherer? Regardless, the final confirmation is that there's one ship involved. Otherwise, it wouldn't have solidified into its present state. From the laughter of the person on the brink of losing control, it's very likely that the death announcer corresponds to Blatherer. A preliminary prediction is that it isn't a grade O sealed artifact. Otherwise, King of Immortality would be the best of the four kings. It's probably a sequence 3. Furthermore, Agalito clearly doesn't match well with it. The level of power shown isn't that high. It's at most sequence 4. That corruptive altar that gave off a feeling as though it was shouting suggests that the blood crystal is able to summon a high-level devil. For example, the Blatherer. Having no idea how to summon a high-level devil, nor having any plans on doing so, Klein casually threw the thin blood crystal along with the Bayunder characteristic, the glowing crystal left behind by the Priest of Light, into the junk pile. Then he perfunctorily named the former Aura of Blatherer. After doing this, Klein cautiously attempted another divination. It was to confirm if he would encounter any danger that night, danger that came from King of Immortality Agalito. In fact, he already had a prediction for the divination's outcome. King of Immortality Agalito wouldn't touch ground on the island. Firstly, it was because Toscarter had a hidden demigod. Ordinary Bayunders might not know, but the four kings would have some level of understanding. And it was unlikely Agalito would wish to have any head-on conflict with other demigods. Forcefully entering the territory of another person wasn't his style. Secondly, Klein's previous theory had produced a conclusion. Agalito didn't dare to leave the death announcer, and the death announcer had no way of going ashore. Indeed, Klein received the revelation that it would be very safe that night. This meant that he didn't need to change his appearance and move to another hotel. Around 9 in the morning of the next day, Klein saw Anderson Hood appear the moment he walked into the restaurant on the first floor and found a seat. Anderson immediately sat opposite him. The strongest hunter used his fingers to comb his short blonde hair, making it part 70-30. As he looked at Jam and Sparrow, he tusked with a laugh. Impressive, you managed to hunt Kirches even when fighting 1-on-3. The way you dragged the devil's corpse downstairs has already spread throughout Toscarter Pier. It's said that every pirate with a bounty on their head has decided to distance themselves from your sights. They will not appear anywhere within a 5-kilometer radius from you. Ever since he acquainted himself with Frank Lee, Klein had quit drinking milk. He raised his hand to order a cup of coffee, a piece of white bread, 2 toasts, a roasted pork sausage, and a plate of butter. Then he replied in an extremely calm manner, "Your ability at gathering intel is pretty good." Anderson chuckled. "This is necessary for a hunter." The Toscarter adventurers are discussing a serious question as to who is the strongest hunter. When Anderson saw Jam and Sparrow look up with a cold and ambiguous gaze, His smile froze. They've all chosen you. Haha, after all, this is the Sanya Sea, and not the Fog Sea. Why did you need to add that second sentence? Just asking for a beating, Klein casually asked, as though being indifferent, anything else. Anderson suddenly felt his comprehension skills were impeded. Any other intel? Klein repeated himself with more detail. There is, Anderson suddenly signaled with his eye. Mulsona from the lone, new party has mysteriously disappeared last night. He mysteriously disappeared in his own room while being protected by countless guards. The official explanation is that Mulsona has already died. The reason was that he possibly consecrated an evil god or summoned a devil. Heh, no one believes that. It's because the Church of Storms has received an anonymous letter that has detailed records of Mulsona's crimes, as well as evidence. He stared intently at Jam and Sparrow, hoping that the crazy adventurer would provide him with more information. He clearly remembered that Jam and Sparrow had just asked him who deserved to be killed yesterday afternoon. And his answer was Mulsona from the lone new party. Klein tersely responded without saying anything more. At this moment, a figure rushed into the hotel. After looking around, he walked towards Klein in delight. He was none other than the bar owner from before. Mr. Sparrow. The owner took off a bonnet that had a depression in the middle and bow. It has already been confirmed, but the process will take another 2 days. After all, it's too large a sum. Heh, I know you'll be leaving today, so in order to not delay your schedule, I've decided to cover the bounty for now. Well, a portion of it comes from the bar's liquid cash, and a portion of it I loaned from my friend. Please make sure the number is right. He deliberately spoke in detail to express his goodwill to Jam and Sparrow while earning a profit. He wanted to befriend this crazy adventurer. As for whether King of Immortality would seek revenge on him, he wasn't too worried. Many a time, Kirches would similarly claim bounties through him. After all, it was a reward for battles between pirates. Everyone liked gaining some additional cash. It was an unspoken rule at sea. Klein did a count of the thick stack of notes worth 6,000 pounds. He split them into a few stacks and placed them into different pockets. Then he said with a nod, "Not bad." The bar owner heaved a sigh of relief. He then warily surveyed his surroundings before suppressing his voice. You have to be careful. King of Immortality is a very vengeful person. He might intercept your ship at sea. He didn't dare to say that he had the means to arrange for someone to board certain ships to depart in secret, afraid that it would be detected by King of Immortality and that he would suffer retaliation as a result. No, Klein replied indifferently. The bar owner didn't speak further. He bowed once more and left the hotel's restaurant. Do you have the means to leave? Anderson looked at Jam and Sparrow with a look of curiosity. Guess. Klein revealed a gentlemanly smile. The corners of Anderson's lips twitched. TM, relieved by seeing your confidence. By the way, the tickets. It set sail at 1:30 in the afternoon. Impressive. I thought I was rather amazing, earning 1,600 pounds in a night. Who knew? Klein didn't respond as he began enjoying his breakfast. Later, he made a new suit to prevent himself from lacking a change of clothes. Time passed, and soon it was time to board the ship. Anderson held a newly bought suitcase and looked at Jam and Sparrow beside him. He asked, seemingly worried, "Are we just leaving on this ship? The death announcer should be around the surrounding water." The future left yesterday after it was resupplied. He felt that leaving while under the wrath of the King of Immortality wasn't a wise choice. It's impossible for Jam and Sparrow to be crazy enough to just storm right into death, right, unless this is his trap. A thought came to Anderson as he had a hunch. Klein didn't turn his head to look at him. He directly boarded the liner with a suitcase. His thoughts were simple. It was likely that the death announcer could sense something wrong with its aura. Based on the King of Immortality's modus operandi, it was unlikely for him to make a forceful assault. If his assumption was wrong, then the moment the death announcer appeared along the horizon, Klein would immediately enter his room and pray to himself. Then he would go above the gray fog to use the scepter to respond. He wanted to see who was stronger, the blatherer at sea or the sea god. This wasn't Klein's original plan. He had planned on using the sea god scepter's ability to command sea creatures to find an underwater carriage for himself. Then, under layers of protection from his charms, he would pull Anderson out into the waters and escape the range of the death announcer's blockade before secretly boarding a liner he had tickets to. However, in consideration that the target of revenge had disappeared all of a sudden, it was possible that the king of immortality would vent his anger on others by slaughtering liners indiscriminately. After all, pirates didn't abide by the law, nor did they come with any proper morals. After divining above the gray fog, Klein ultimately decided to leave brazenly.